We are here in Athens, Greece. Right behind me is the Acropolis, home to Aristotle and Plato and Socrates. This place influenced all of Western civilization with its thought, and this was the site in Acts chapter 17 of an amazing confrontation between the Apostle Paul and the philosophers of Athens.
When Paul gets to Athens, he does what any tourist does. He goes sightseeing. Athens is still a striking city today. There are the great temples of the Acropolis, crowned by the Parthenon, still one of the most beautiful buildings in the world, even in ruins. And many other theaters and temples and marketplaces of the Athens of Paul's day survive. And as Paul walks around Athens, he sees all the idols that are being worshipped. One of the ancient writers says at this time there were 30,000 gods in Athens. Petronius, one of the ancient historians, said it was easier to find a god in Athens than a man. Many of these statues of deities of Paul's time have survived. And Luke says Paul's spirit was moved when he saw this. The Greek word he uses there is the word from which we get our word paroxysm. Paul felt a paroxysm of the Spirit. He is really troubled by all this idol worship. And so Paul starts talking about the Christian faith to people in the marketplace, and that's where he's overheard, Luke tells us, by some philosophers, specifically Epicureans and Stoics. Some of them said, "What is this babbler trying to say?" And they brought him here to the Areopagus, Mars Hill, the place where the leading philosophers of the city decided on all the most important court cases. And they said, "What's this new teaching which you present? For you bring some strange things to our ears. We wish to know, therefore, what these things mean."
Now, by Paul's time, probably the Areopagus, the Council of Philosophers, which was sort of like Cambridge and Oxford and Harvard in our day, all put together, they most likely did not meet up on the bare, rocky hill right behind me called Mars Hill. Probably they met at the base of Mars Hill, where you see the ruins of the Athens philosophical schools behind me. This was where the philosophers met. This was where they did nothing but, according to Luke, listen to the latest ideas. And Paul just does a genius job of introducing the gospel to these Epicurean and Stoic philosophers and to the pagan Greek worshipers. And there's some great examples for you and I in this conversation he has with these philosophers. Number one, he starts where people are at. He does not scold them. He doesn't say, "You are all completely wrong and you're all going to hell." Really, he points out to them, you know what, there's something about the Epicurean philosophy, something about the Stoic philosophy, something even about the heart behind the search for God inherent in pagan religion that is a response to the fact that God exists and He created you and He longs for you to know Him, you long to know Him. And Paul says, what you are, in a sense, already worshiping as an unknown God, I'm now proclaiming to you. So he starts where people are at. That's always a good starting place. Don't start by alienating people. Start by acknowledging what's good in their culture, what's great in their belief system.
He says, "Men of Athens, I notice that you are very religious in every way, for as I was walking along, I saw your many shrines, and one of your altars had this inscription on it, 'To an unknown God.' This God, whom you worship without knowing, is the one I'm telling you about."
And then second, he establishes the kind of God he's talking about, a God who is both completely transcendent, far beyond our wildest imaginations, but also a God who is intimate and personal and as close to us as our most intimate thoughts, as close as our breath.
Verse 24, "He is the God who made the world and everything in it. Since He's Lord of heaven and earth, He doesn't live in man-made temples, and human hands can't serve His needs, for He has no needs. He Himself gives life and breath to everything, and He satisfies every need. From one man He created all the nations throughout the whole earth, and He decided beforehand when they should rise and fall, and He determined their boundaries. His purpose was for the nations to seek after God and perhaps feel their way toward him and find him, though he's not far from any one of us. For in him we live and move and exist. As some of your own poets have said, we are his offspring.
What's he saying here? He's saying that the true God really desires a relationship with you. That's such a powerful message. So first, he points out that there are some things in their culture that are worth mentioning, that are good. He starts with where the people are at. Second, he describes the nature of the true God. He's both majestic and intimate, both awesome and gracious. He's a giving God. And then the third thing he talks about is my response. It's my responsibility to repent and turn to this true God.
Verse 29. And since this is true, we shouldn't think of God as an idol designed by craftsmen from gold or silver or stone. God overlooked people's ignorance about these things in earlier times, but now he commands everyone, everywhere, to repent of their sins and turn to him. For he has set a day for judging the world with justice by the man he has appointed, and he proved to everyone who this is by raising him from the dead.
And Paul says this is an urgent thing because he says God has appointed a day when every one of us will be judged. And really, all of us know that deep inside, that we're going to stand before God and we're going to be judged. But Paul says the good news is our judge is not one of these capricious Athenian deities, and you never know what they're thinking or what they're going to make you do. The good news is we have a righteous judge. He was a righteous man. And Paul says God has given proof of this by raising this man from the dead. And that is when all you know what breaks loose right here in the philosophical school at the foot of Mars Hill in Athens, because it was one of the fundamental planks of the Areopagus established way back in the 4th century that there was one life and then you die and that's it. In fact, there was a play written about this by a famous playwright where the god Apollo establishes the Athenian school of philosophy, and he says one of the reasons we're establishing it, one of the reasons philosophy is important, is that once a man dies, there is no resurrection. That was one of the things the Areopagus believed. And so when Paul talks about the resurrection, they all rise up and some of them say, no, that's garbage, or that's heresy, we can't listen to it here. But some of them say, well, we want to hear more about this. And some of them, a few, Luke says, believed. And the amazing thing is one of the believers is Dionysius, who is one of the leaders of the Areopagus. And church tradition tells us that Dionysius turned out to be the first bishop of the Christian church here at Athens. And Luke also says that a woman named Damaris is another one of the early believers. Now he says that she was a woman. He doesn't specify that she was a wealthy woman like he did earlier in Acts. And so there's some speculation that perhaps Damaris came from one of the seedy sides of town. So what can you and I learn from the way Paul shares his faith right here at the base of Mars Hill in the Areopagus, the School of Philosophy at Athens? How do you think our society reflects Athenian society? How do we have Epicureans and Stoics today? Think about that, because I think Paul's example here is a phenomenal, way ahead of its time example for how we can share our faith in a secular, skeptical, and agnostic society.